background to the event, we used this picture, this iconic picture of the historical relationship, the inequality that exists between two worlds. And that person is the name of Professor Cartwright, who invented something called depomania, which is the lack of power given to particularly African communities over the last 400 years. We think this resonates in current practices. So what WREN has done in collaboration with Lancet is looked at how can we get a better representation of lived experiences in the peer review process. That means looking at academic papers and making sure they're addressing two things: race equality, but also the impact and a really important feature of the work today, the mental health legislation, which has been reformed since 2018. So the conference today is just to begin at a superficial level to look at some of the patterns of funding to academic institutions. There will be concerns raised about why do they go to certain, and I have to put white academic institutions. Why is it they go to particularly white publishers, and why they're reviewed by particular aspects of whiteness? And what implications does this have for issues around equality in policy and legislation? And I really want people to be open and challenging and begin to address their experience. Is Kemi saying, I hope you can hear and see?
No, that's me just sending a message.
Okay, then. Okay. So the next slide. So the first part of the research will just be breaking down a very superficial inspection and analysis about race in research and publication. Because the end of it, after, what we want to do is to promote and encourage a more diverse representation from writers, not particularly from academic background, but their experiences have parity and is recognized as important, but also addressing what we call racialized injustice in terms of how minority and diversity groups are actually presented and written about, and some of the stereotypes that are perpetuated through those academic documents. And the end point for us is that how can we then improve and train a new generation of lived experience practitioners, not just to be reviewers, but to also be represented on those panels and decision-making processes. And lastly, we'll look at very quickly a video that we're trying to promote as a form of training about how do you encourage working across those difficult lines of race and racialization. So I'm just going to start the research that we've done so far. Anybody who wants to ask questions, do go ahead. This is why I'm really concerned. I have lived experience. I have a diagnosis of schizophrenia. I have a generation of comrades who have been misdiagnosed with this particular diagnosis. The major concern now, as we look at this period of time in 2022, is why have we had this increase in overrepresentation of people detained under the mental health system? So you can see there's a really concerning data there, 49,551. That's in 2018. There's data coming out later on this year that will show that's increased. But what's really concerning is why is it, and we know this data, Black people are 8 times more likely to be on a community treatment order. That's the section 17A. So people are not aware of that. That's when you come into hospital under a treatment order, and to go home, they put you on a community treatment order. Why are Black people 4 times more likely to be detained than white people? So we've got quite a strong comparative analysis. And the data goes on and on and on and on and on. That's the data. But really concerns me is that how we make perceptions, something that's emerged quite importantly called implicit association. I put the picture here of somebody who I think made the most radical change to perceptions of race and race identity, and how people from Black and minority ethnic communities are assumed to be more likely. It's a guy named Christopher Clunas, who unfortunately was sectioned. He actually was denied a series of service intervention. He actually externalized his anxiety and anger with the system by killing a white person. And that raised a great moral panic about the fear of people in community spaces and the use of the Mental Health Act. And did it become a criminal justice system or response to those fears? Just going to go to the next slide. So what we looked at, and it's a very small study, and this will be elaborated. We wanted to find out with something called the modernization of the Mental Health Act, which has come in over the last 4 years. There's been great consultations with different groups. One of the groups has been an African and Caribbean group represented by very esteemed people like Jackie Dyer, from somebody called the Parent and Carers Race Equality Framework. Dr. Alia Smith and Steve Gilbert represented that. And what they asked for was more research. Since that, I was really concerned about where is the money going to, who's doing the research, and are we represented? So we looked at the money that's being produced by the government through something called the National Institute for Health and Social Care, which has provided £3 million. And there are 4 projects that have been set up that are now being registered as by the government as academic interventions to begin to look at issues of race and other interconnected issues. So there's one at Manchester University, run by Professor Joy Duxbury, who we all know quite well. And it's really based upon experiences of Black men in the mental health system. The second project is Professor Campbell and Dr. Mooney at Oxford University. They're using a new methodology about using photographs rather than qualitative data, talking to people. And the 2 others are at the University of London and also at Coventry. So when I looked at this, the thing I was really concerned about, there was no senior Black researchers in any of these projects. There are researchers from a lived experience, but the co-production model is based on one of what we called collaboration, rather than giving power to lived experience to devise their own framework. So I'm really concerned now from the first slide, we have this historical problem of the overrepresentation in the mental health system. And now we have a collaboration between the government giving money to mainly white academic institutions to research and reveal important information about what was taking place in terms of the relationship between race and mental health inside our systems. So I'm just going to go on to the next one. So what we've done, and this is a very small start of it, we then did what you call the systematic review of some of the publications, and we focused just on the Lancet. It's not a scientific thing to do. You just have inclusion criteria about words that you think are important, and then that reveals a number of documents. But the area we're really interested is about how was race and mental health being researched, but how was it actually written about and published between 2010 and 2020. So we've done serious researches. I've got to thank Dr. Lamb. I hope Dr. Lamb is on the line soon because he's taken over from me in a minute.
Hey,
Colin. Oh, fantastic. Oh, good. Because I know Liverpool lost and I'm sure you want to turn up or not. So I'm happy about that. So we looked at, and this is all the great experience I've had working with Dr. Lamb, and it's been a great collaboration. We looked at over, so far, 537 documents, but we broke it down to sort of 14 documents that really begin to focus on race and mental health. And the massive systematic themes, I won't go through to bore you with what you need to look at. There may be major themes that most of the themes that there was a failure of a racialized lived experience, which is mainly that most of the documents were not being written by people of race or color or ethnicity, and they were not written by people with lived experience. Actually, ironically, 2 of the documents were written by people that are here today. I'm not sure if Ardia Lewis is on the line. She has written a document called Black Men Wanted for Restraint and Research that was published by the Lancet, and the other things have been published through the Whiteness and Race Equality Network. So that began to ring alarm bells for me about what was taking place in terms of race in the mental health system, race in the funding to academic institutions, and race in terms of publication. So I'm just going to go on to the next slide. So we then began to look at who are the people that are represented in the system. I'm not sure if Joan Marsh is on the line. She will correct me if I got this wrong. We looked particularly at the Lancet. There are so many different publications. I know there may be a couple of people here from another publication called Frontier Psychiatry, which has really recently emerged. Have we got someone here? Jeremy's pointed out.
Colin, that's just me addressing.
Okay, then. Okay, then.
Don't worry about it. I'll bring it up if there's anything else. Kenny had mentioned that the chat function had been disabled, so I have reset the settings so that it should be enabled. And Kenny, if there are any other questions or issues, just do let me know. Also, Colin, Avi is fine. They are one of the participants here.
Okay. So what we then did as a research was then look at the Lancet, and we asked them, do you have data? They had some data, but unfortunately we had to look at pictures. So methodologically, this is a bit flawed. So they have an editorial advisory board, and we looked at racialized background. Now, this is a difficult thing to be scientific with. We just had the new classifications from the census data, which has changed it. So sometimes you have to kind of say non-whites and whites. So we looked at people of non-white background, and it's as high as 43% on the editorial board. But if you go into more detail, you include people from a Chinese origin, people from different cultural origins as well. So it's very difficult to be really scientific about that. We then looked at the editors working for the Lancet, and there are the pictures of them below. The editors, senior editors, were all white. Then we asked Lancet, did you have any information on your current review, peer reviewers? Unfortunately, they've just done something on gender. There's nothing on race. But what's quite interesting for later on, when we looked at the peer review course recommended by the Lancet, all the trainers on the course were white. Now, we need to look at the implications for what's taken place, because Lancet have taken it very seriously, and they've now produced their equality impact statements, which is on the next slide. So the Lancet, and this is ironic because advancing race equality is something now being introduced by the National Health Service and the modernization of the mental health legislation. And this is their statement. And they've also got an advancing race equality board, which is beginning to address these issues.